My brother convinced everyone I was mentally ill. Everyone. And for 2 years, I couldn't leave the hospital, couldn't see my friends, couldn't make a phone call without being monitored. Meanwhile, he was living like a king with my $5 million inheritance. And when I finally walked out, free at last, he had the audacity to laugh in my face. "Welcome back to reality, crazy sister," he said, like it was a joke. I didn't even flinch. I just handed him an envelope. Inside was a court order that would ruin him, and in that moment I realized something. I wasn't crazy. He was. "Hi, I'm Alexis Monroe. I'm 32, and I know what it feels like to be trapped, powerless, and betrayed by someone you love more than anyone else in the world. My story starts before the betrayal, before the lies, before Derek's greedy plan began. Back then, my life seemed normal. I had a good job in marketing, a circle of friends who genuinely cared about me, and a family that, on the surface, seemed to have my back. But appearances are dangerous. They hide truths that can destroy you in ways you never imagined. Derek Monroe, my older brother, was always the golden child. At 35, he had a charm that made everyone, including our parents, believe he could do no wrong. He was smooth, confident, and effortlessly convincing. People liked him. People trusted him. I loved him. I never suspected that the same charm could mask a complete lack of empathy, a manipulative mind, and a relentless obsession with money. Mom, Eleanor Monroe, adored Derek. She always said he was her special boy, the one she could count on to take care of everything. She didn't see the signs, or maybe she didn't want to. Dad, Richard Monroe, my father, was supportive but passive. He never confronted Derek, never questioned him, and always seemed hesitant to step in when things got tense. I loved them both, but their trust in Derek became one of the sharpest knives in my back. Even before the nightmare began, Derek had this subtle way of undermining me without anyone noticing. A little comment here, a sly suggestion there. "Are you sure you're ready for this responsibility?" Or, "Maybe you're overthinking things, Alex." On the surface, it sounded like brotherly advice, but looking back now, I can see it for what it really was. Preparation. He was setting the stage, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of the people around me, so that when the moment came, they would believe him over me. And then there was the inheritance. $5 million. It wasn't just money, it was a symbol of everything my parents had worked for, everything that represented our family's future. And Derek wanted it. He didn't just want it, he needed it. He had no plans to earn it, no intentions of doing anything honest with it. He wanted to control it, to spend it, to erase any trace of me from the equation. I should have seen it coming. I should have noticed the way he smiled just a little too smugly when Mom mentioned my name. I should have questioned why he was suddenly so involved in my finances, always asking leading questions, always planting suggestions in our family conversations. But I didn't. I trusted him. And that trust almost destroyed me. Before I knew what was happening, I was being watched, questioned, and eventually committed. Derek had convinced everyone, Mom, Dad, even a few of my closest friends, that I was mentally unstable. They didn't ask questions, they didn't look for proof, they just believed him. And when the doors of the facility closed behind me, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was completely, utterly alone. So here I am, telling you my story, not just to shock you with what my brother did, but to show you what it feels like to be trapped, powerless, and yet still fighting from the inside. Because even in the darkest, most suffocating moments, there's always a way to reclaim your life. There's always a way to prove the truth, and I promise you, this is where the story truly begins. Before Derek's lies tore my life apart, my world felt stable. I had a rhythm, a sense of control, and a family that I thought would always be there for me. My name is Alexis Monroe, and growing up, I always tried to do the right thing. I worked hard, pursued my dreams, and genuinely cared about the people around me. I trusted my family to support me, even when Derek sometimes made me feel small. Our family wasn't perfect. What family is? But on the surface, everything seemed normal. Mom, Eleanor Monroe, was warm and attentive, the type of mother who remembered every birthday, every little achievement. She had a soft spot for Derek, yes, but I thought she loved me just as much. Dad, Richard Monroe, was quieter, more reserved, the kind of father who showed love through actions rather than words. He encouraged me in school and in life, even if he sometimes shied away from family confrontations. Derek, though, was different. He had a presence that demanded attention. He could walk into a room and everyone would listen. People were drawn to his charisma, his easy confidence, the way he could make even the simplest comment sound profound. I loved him, but I also feared him in ways I didn't fully understand. As a kid, he'd sometimes mock me in ways that hurt more than he realized. I'd try to laugh it off, but the unease never fully left me. Life before the betrayal had its small joys. I had a job I loved in marketing, where I could channel my creativity. I had friends who made me laugh until my cheeks hurt, friends who trusted me with their secrets and whom I trusted with mine. I traveled on weekends. I indulged in little luxuries, and I felt like I had built a life on my own terms. I was independent, confident, and happy, or at least I thought I was. Then there was the inheritance. My parents had worked hard, and a portion of their estate was set aside for me. $5 million. It wasn't just money. It was a safety net, a symbol of their trust and love, and a seed for my future. When I first heard the amount, I was in awe, but I didn't see it as a tool for greed. To me, it was a responsibility. I wanted to invest it wisely, maybe start a small business or help the people around me. Derek saw it differently. Derek saw opportunity. At first, Derek acted supportive. He was charming, always asking, "What do you plan to do with it, Alex?" and offering advice that sounded caring. Mom would smile and nod, clearly impressed by his involvement. Dad would just shrug and say, "Derek's right. Maybe she should listen." I didn't realize that those questions, those smiles, were the first moves in a carefully crafted plan to isolate me and convince everyone else that I was unstable. Looking back, there were warning signs I ignored. The way Derek would make small, cutting comments about my decisions, phrasing them as concern. "Are you sure you can handle this, Alex? Sometimes people take risks they're not ready for." Or the subtle way he'd question my memory, my judgment, or even my moods. I brushed it off, thinking he was protective, that he cared. I didn't suspect manipulation. I felt safe in my routine. My days were predictable, comforting. I would wake up, get ready for work, check in with friends, spend time with my parents on weekends. I even had small indulgences. Coffee at my favorite cafe, spontaneous road trips, late-night calls with friends who felt more like family. Life was ordinary, but ordinary was good. I had no idea how quickly it would be ripped away. Even my relationship with my parents seemed solid. I confided in Mom about my ambitions, my fears, and my excitement about the inheritance. She seemed happy for me, proud even. Dad would offer practical advice, quietly supporting my plans. And yet, beneath the surface, Derek's influence was growing. I didn't see the way he was slowly controlling conversations, planting seeds of doubt, and positioning himself as the voice of reason. I didn't see how quickly my safe, familiar world would turn against me. The turning point hadn't happened yet, but the stage was being set. I didn't know it at the time, but Derek was preparing the narrative that would convince everyone, friends, family, professionals, that I was unstable, that I needed intervention. I was blissfully unaware that in just a few months, the life I loved would be taken from me, replaced with isolation, fear, and helplessness. Before the nightmare, I was happy, independent, and confident. I trusted my family, and I trusted my brother. I didn't know that the very people I loved would become pawns in a plot to steal my inheritance. I didn't know that Derek's charm and cunning would nearly destroy me. And I certainly didn't know that those 2 years of captivity would change me in ways I could never have imagined, but would ultimately set me up for the ultimate triumph. I didn't see it coming. Not really. Derek's plan unfolded like a storm I couldn't escape. One day, life was normal. I was planning a weekend getaway with friends, laughing at silly jokes, confident that my family supported me. The next day, everything changed. I became the person everyone feared, the crazy one, the unstable one. It started with subtle comments. Derek would lean in, his voice calm and casual, and say things like, "Alex, I'm worried about you." "You've been acting so unusual lately." Or, "Maybe you should get a professional opinion. Sometimes people don't realize when they're spiraling." At first, I laughed it off. "Derek, you're overreacting," I would reply. But the laughter didn't reach my eyes. Something in his tone made me pause. He wasn't joking. Then the seed of doubt began to grow in everyone around me. Mom, who I trusted implicitly, started asking questions I had never heard before. "Alex, are you sure you're okay? Derek seems concerned." Dad would nod silently, his eyes avoiding mine. I tried to explain, tried to reassure them, but they hesitated. They wanted proof I wasn't unstable, and Derek provided it, or at least he claimed he did. It escalated quickly. Derek started documenting small things, exaggerating them, and presenting them as evidence. Moments of stress I had confided to him in trust became episodes. My occasional frustration over work, my panic about deadlines, my late-night calls to friends, he painted them as signs of a mental breakdown. He told therapists that I was volatile, unpredictable, even dangerous. I was blindsided. How could someone I trusted so completely betray me like this? I remember the day the facility came for me. I was at home, organizing paperwork for the inheritance, when a calm woman in a suit arrived. She introduced herself as a caseworker and said I needed to come in for an evaluation. I laughed, assuming it was a routine check, but then the door opened and nurses walked in behind her, holding forms and instructions. My protests fell on deaf ears. Derek was there, smiling as if this were a game. "Alex, this is for your own good," he said, the words dripping with false concern. "You're just a little overwhelmed and they'll help you." I stared at him, searching for any hint of the brother I had loved. There was none, only cold calculation. Within hours, I was stripped of my autonomy, escorted to a facility where my every move would be monitored. My phone, my computer, even my personal belongings were taken away. The room I was placed in felt sterile and suffocating, and the world outside disappeared. At first, I tried to fight. I shouted, demanded explanations, begged for someone, anyone, to listen. But the staff followed the documents Derek had prepared. They didn't question his motives, didn't ask if I had a history of mental illness. They just accepted his story as fact. Felt invisible. My voice didn't matter. My reality didn't matter. All that mattered was Derek's version. 2 years passed in a haze. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. I learned the schedule of the nurses, the routines of the doctors, and the limitations of the system. I watched other patients come and go, some truly needing help, some like me, trapped by lies. All the while, Derek lived freely, enjoying my inheritance. He traveled, bought luxury items, and flaunted his success as if the money were his birthright. I had been reduced to a name on a chart while he lived my dream life. The emotional toll was unbearable. I felt anger, despair, frustration, and hopelessness, all in sharp waves that left me exhausted. I cried when I was alone, screaming at the walls that this wasn't fair. I hated him in ways that I didn't fully understand, and I hated myself for trusting him. But even in the depths of that nightmare, a small spark of determination remained. I refused to let him win completely. I refused to let him erase me. I started to observe, to learn, to plan. Every conversation, every visit, every form he submitted was a piece of the puzzle. If he wanted to play the game of lies and manipulation, I would play it smarter. I didn't know yet how I would escape, how I would reclaim my life, or how I would prove the truth. But one thing became crystal clear. Derek had underestimated me. He thought that labeling me as crazy would break me. He was wrong. And that's when I realized the harshest truth. The people I loved and trusted the most, my parents, my friends, even some professionals, had been turned against me. Derek had weaponized their concern and loyalty to him. I had to accept that no one would come to my rescue. If I wanted justice, I would have to fight for it myself. The stakes were higher than ever, and the path ahead was dangerous, but I could feel the first threads of my plan taking shape in my mind. This was the darkest chapter of my life. Betrayal, isolation, helplessness. It was suffocating, but it was also the moment when I realized that the battle for my life and my inheritance had only just begun. Derek thought he had won, but I was still breathing, still thinking, still plotting. and I knew that one day I would turn the tables. 2 years trapped in that facility taught me many things, mostly patience, observation, and the strength I didn't know I had. At first, I was consumed by anger, despair, and the crushing weight of helplessness. But after weeks of this relentless cycle, I realized something crucial. Waiting for someone else to rescue me would get me nowhere. Derek had manipulated my family, the system, even the people who were supposed to care for me. If I wanted my life back, I had to fight, not with brute force, but with strategy. The first step was understanding the terrain. I began watching patterns, how the staff responded to certain situations, how forms were processed, which lawyers and professionals were involved in cases like mine. I observed Derek's manipulations from a distance, noting how he controlled every conversation with my parents and the legal system. Every visit he made, every phone call monitored by the facility, I recorded in my mind, memorizing details that would later become critical. I also had to reclaim my mind. Isolation and constant monitoring were designed to make me doubt myself, to break me emotionally. I refused to give him that satisfaction. I set small goals each day, remember every detail of my interactions, track inconsistencies in Derek's stories, and keep a mental log of everything I knew about the inheritance, the transfers, and his expenditures. My goal was clear: turn the knowledge I had into leverage. Slowly, I began planting seeds of evidence. I asked questions subtly during therapy sessions, capturing information that would contradict Derek's lies. I kept track of dates, receipts, bank statements, and statements from people he thought he had silenced. Every piece of information became a weapon, every observation a clue in a puzzle only I could see clearly. But observation and planning alone weren't enough. I had to act, and carefully. The facility limited my access to communication, but I found small cracks in the system. I befriended a few staff members who were genuinely kind, subtly gaining their trust. I didn't share my story outright. I couldn't risk Derek finding out that I was planning my counterattack, but I learned who could be helpful, who could validate small details, and who could provide the legal access I needed when the time came. And then, the moment came when I realized that my silence could be a weapon too. Derek had assumed I would lash out, plead, beg, or break down. Instead, I became calm, calculating, and unreactive. My lack of visible emotion frustrated him, and it made him careless. He believed his control over me was complete. He believed I was defeated. That overconfidence was his greatest weakness. I began strategizing my legal comeback in earnest. I researched laws regarding wrongful commitment, financial exploitation, and fraud. I memorized the loopholes and the processes that could reverse Derek's control over my inheritance. I visualized the steps I needed to take once I regained my freedom: gather witnesses, consolidate evidence, file court motions, and prepare for the confrontation that would finally expose him. It wasn't easy. Every day I had to resist despair and keep my plan alive in my mind. The isolation was crushing. Sometimes I questioned whether I would ever get out. But every time Derek's name came up, I reminded myself that I wasn't powerless. He had underestimated me, and underestimation is a dangerous mistake when your opponent refuses to break. I also strengthened my emotional armor. I had to imagine the confrontation in advance, prepare for his smirks, his laughs, and the venomous way he would try to provoke me. I rehearsed my calm response in my mind over and over. No reaction, just evidence, just truth. I knew that showing anger would give him power. Remaining composed would make his arrogance his downfall. During the final months before my release, I perfected the plan. I compiled mental checklists of evidence, rehearsed how to interact with the court, and visualized the moment I would hand him the court order that would finally strip him of everything. I imagined the shock in his eyes. When the tables turned, it became my fuel, my focus, my lifeline. By the time the facility's paperwork cleared for my release, I wasn't just a woman returning to the outside world. I was a strategist, a survivor, and someone ready to reclaim her life with precision. Derek had stolen 2 years of my freedom, but he had not broken me. In fact, those 2 years had sharpened me, focused me, and prepared me for the ultimate victory. The turning point wasn't a dramatic escape or a sudden confrontation. It was a slow, deliberate decision. I would no longer be a victim. I would take control. I would use his arrogance, his greed, and his lies against him. And when the day came that I finally walked through those doors, I knew exactly what I had to do next. I wasn't crazy. I was ready. The day I walked out of that facility felt surreal. The sunlight hitting my face, the sound of traffic, the smell of fresh air, it was intoxicating. After 2 years of confinement, every detail of the outside world felt amplified, sharper, brighter, and more alive than I remembered. But I didn't let myself get lost in the freedom. I had a mission. Derek had stolen years of my life and every penny of my inheritance, but he hadn't anticipated one thing: my patience and my precision. I arrived at our family home, a place that had once been warm and comforting, and now felt like the stage for the confrontation I had been rehearsing in my mind for months. Derek was already there, lounging in the living room as if he owned the world, because in his mind, he did. When he saw me, a smug smile spread across his face, the same one I had despised for 2 long years. "Welcome back to reality, crazy sister," he said, chuckling as if the entire ordeal had been a joke. His words cut like a knife, but I felt nothing. Not anger, not frustration, not fear. I had prepared for this. I stepped inside, my posture calm, my face neutral. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. Every second I held my silence. His confidence wavered ever so slightly. He leaned back, clearly expecting a reaction. "Wow," he said, smirking. "You're really keeping that crazy facade going, huh?" He laughed, loud and mocking, as if my suffering had been entertaining. I kept my eyes fixed on him, steady and unyielding. Derek had trained everyone to believe that I was fragile, emotional, and easily shaken. But today, I was none of those things. Today, I was in control. I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain envelope, holding it out casually as if it contained something trivial. Derek's eyebrows lifted in curiosity. "What's that?" he asked, his voice betraying the faintest edge of caution. I didn't answer. I simply said, calmly and deliberately, "Open it." He laughed again, thinking this was part of some weird joke. But the second he opened it, the world shifted. Inside was a thick packet of documents, legal orders, court rulings, evidence compilations, and official notices. I had spent months working with my lawyer, painstakingly gathering everything Derek had tried to hide, every fraudulent claim, every manipulation, every transaction he had made with my inheritance. The envelope wasn't just a paper trail. It was a weapon, perfectly loaded and aimed directly at him. Derek's smile faltered as he scanned the first few pages. His eyes widened, his confident demeanor cracking. What is this?" he stammered, the words sharp but uncertain. I remained silent. I let him read, let him process the reality he had ignored for so long. The court had frozen his access to the inheritance, reversed every transaction he had made, and initiated charges for fraud, coercion, and manipulation. His world, built on my suffering, was collapsing with every second he stared at the documents. I don't understand," he said finally, voice shaking now. "This can't be legal." "It's very legal," I replied, calm and precise. "Everything you've done has been documented. You manipulated our family, lied about my mental health, and tried to steal what was never yours. And now you'll face the consequences." For the first time, I saw fear in Derek's eyes. He who had mocked my every move, who had laughed at my confinement, who had assumed victory before the battle even began, he realized he had lost. There was no charm, no smirk, no manipulation that could save him this time. The arrogant, confident brother who had tormented me for years was powerless. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell or make threats. I didn't let him see any satisfaction in my triumph. I simply handed him the envelope, stood tall, and let the silence do the work. The room was heavy with tension, every second stretching long, filled with the weight of justice finally delivered. This wasn't just about money. This was about truth. This was about reclaiming my life, my identity, and my dignity. Derek had tried to rewrite reality, to convince everyone I was unstable. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and in that moment, it did. I looked at him one last time and said quietly, almost softly, "Who's crazy now?" His face went pale, his arrogance replaced with panic, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and satisfaction. The nightmare was over. 2 years of manipulation, betrayal, and confinement had ended, not with rage or revenge, but with truth and calculated precision. Derek had underestimated me, and in doing so, he had sealed his own downfall. I turned and walked away, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders, knowing that finally, for the first time in 2 long years, I was free. Free from the facility, free from Derek's manipulation, and free to rebuild the life that was rightfully mine. Walking away from Derek that day, the envelope still heavy in his hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Relief that the nightmare was finally over, relief that the truth had triumphed over lies, and relief that I could finally breathe again. But it wasn't just relief. It was clarity. 2 years of being trapped, manipulated, and isolated had left scars, but it had also given me insight into people, power, and the kind of resilience I never knew I had. Returning to my parents' home was strange. Mom and Dad were there, and their expressions were a mixture of guilt, fear, and relief. They didn't know what to say at first. Eleanor, my mother, kept glancing at me with tears in her eyes, probably replaying all the moments she had believed Derek over me. "Alex, she started, voice trembling. I held up a hand. Don't explain, just understand that I'm okay now." I didn't want apologies. I wanted acknowledgement that the damage had been done, that trust had been broken, and that things would never be the same. Derek's downfall was complete, but watching him scramble was strangely anticlimactic. He wasn't violent, didn't shout, didn't lash out physically. His arrogance had been replaced with panic, his confidence shattered. I realized that his cruelty had always depended on the illusion of control. Once that illusion vanished, so did his power. He had taken 2 years of my life, but he hadn't taken my mind, my spirit, or my ability to reclaim what was mine. That thought alone was worth more than any inheritance. The court proceedings were methodical. Every transaction Derek had made with my inheritance was reversed, legal penalties were enforced, and his reputation, once polished and charming, was irreparably damaged. The relief wasn't in vengeance. It wasn't in seeing him humbled. The relief was knowing that justice, no matter how delayed, could be achieved. That lesson is the one I carry with me above all else. Even in the darkest, most powerless moments, truth has a way of prevailing. Emotionally, I had to rebuild. 2 years in confinement changes a person. It erodes confidence, shakes trust, and tests your mental resilience. I had to learn to trust myself again, to make decisions without fear that someone else would manipulate them, to reclaim my identity, which Derek had tried to rewrite. I spent weeks reconnecting with friends I had lost contact with, mending relationships that had been strained, and allowing myself to feel the simple joys I had once taken for granted. Morning coffee in the sun, spontaneous laughter, long walks without being monitored. I also had to reassess my family dynamics. My parents had been deceived. Yes, but they were not evil. Their guilt was palpable, and our relationships required honest conversations. I forgave them, but I didn't forget. Forgiveness didn't mean erasing the past. It meant acknowledging it and setting boundaries to prevent it from happening again. I realized that even those we love most can be misled, and part of reclaiming our lives is learning to protect ourselves without resentment consuming us. Professionally and financially, I rebuilt carefully. I invested my inheritance wisely, sought trustworthy advisors, and focused on long-term security. Derek's recklessness had nearly cost me everything, but it had also taught me valuable lessons about vigilance, trust, and accountability. I became more confident in setting boundaries, more discerning with people who claimed to have my best interests at heart, and more determined to ensure that no one could ever control me in the same way again. Most importantly, I learned something about myself. I learned that resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about thinking strategically, keeping your mind sharp under pressure, and refusing to let circumstances define you. I learned that calm, deliberate action often achieves more than anger or impulsive reactions. And I learned that even in the face of betrayal by those closest to you, you can reclaim your life, your dignity, and your power. 2 years of my life were stolen, but I didn't let those years define me. I didn't allow Derek's manipulation to shape who I would become. And in that, there was triumph, far beyond the court orders or the money. It was a triumph of mind, spirit, and will. I often reflect on that moment I handed Derek the envelope. The calmness in my voice, the steadiness in my eyes, it was more powerful than any yell, any confrontation, any outburst of revenge. He had tried to label me as crazy, but the truth was undeniable. I was the one who had planned, persevered, and ultimately prevailed. So if there's a lesson to take from my story, it's this: strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes strength is quiet, calculated, and patient. Sometimes it's the person who has been knocked down but refuses to stay down, who watches, plans, and rises again. And sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. It looks like reclaiming your life with dignity, proving the truth, and walking away stronger than before. I lost time, but I didn't lose my mind. And in the end, the world learned the truth about Derek, but more importantly, I learned the truth about myself. Who's crazy now? Wow, what a journey, right? 2 years of betrayal, manipulation, and lost time, but ultimately, triumph, justice, and reclaiming my life. If you've ever felt powerless or underestimated, I hope this story reminds you that your strength is greater than you know. If this video resonated with you, make sure to like it because it really helps others discover the story. Share it with someone who loves true life drama and stories of resilience. I'd also love to hear your thoughts, so comment below. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our storytelling videos. There are more unbelievable stories coming your way, and you definitely don't want to miss them. Thanks for watching, and remember, even in your darkest moments, patience, courage, and truth can turn the tide. Until next time, stay strong and stay aware.